The DNA email was supposed to bring closure instead. It exposed a lie. My mother protected for years. When my stepfather swung first, he didn't know what I had saved. I sat in that emergency room, blood still drying on my temple, typing a message to her with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, from clarity. 20 years of questions answered in one midnight email, and she chose him over the truth, over me. I told her everything in one message, and then I made sure she couldn't erase any of it. My name is Caroline, and I've spent 33 years believing I knew who I was. Systems auditor at the power company. Decent apartment in Albuquerque. No husband, no kids. Just me and the questions that kept me up at night. The kind of questions you push down during the day, but that claw their way back up when you're alone with spreadsheets and compliance reports. The email came through at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour shift tracking down a discrepancy in the grid maintenance logs. My feet hurt. My eyes burned from staring at screens, and all I wanted was to check my personal email before collapsing into bed. Subject line: your DNA results are ready. I'd submitted the sample 6 weeks ago, one of those commercial ancestry services. Nothing fancy, just spit in a tube, mail it off, wait for answers. My coworker Diane had done it, and discovered she was part Norwegian. I didn't care about percentages of European heritage. I wanted one answer to one question that had gnawed at me since I was old enough to understand why I looked nothing like the man my mother had pointed to in old photographs. Your father, she'd said, showing me a picture of a dark-haired man with a crooked smile. James Reeves. Died in a motorcycle accident when I was 2. No other pictures, no family to visit, no stories beyond the basics, just a name and a convenient tragedy. I clicked the email open. The results loaded slowly. My apartment's Wi-Fi struggling as usual. Ethnicity breakdown, health markers, all the standard stuff I scrolled past. Then I hit the section I'd been waiting for: DNA relatives. First match: Franklin D. Ellis, relationship parent, child. Probability 99.97%. I stared at the screen, read it again. Franklin D. Ellis, not James Reeves, not the dead motorcyclist from my mother's careful fiction, a complete stranger with a name I'd never heard. My hands weren't steady as I clicked on his profile. Living in Tucson, 61 years old, 3 other children listed as DNA matches my half-siblings. Apparently, the system showed he'd logged in recently, within the last week. I sat back in my desk chair, still in my work clothes, trying to process what I was seeing. 33 years of lies, every birthday, every Father's Day when I'd stood at James Reeves's supposed grave with grocery store flowers, every time I'd asked my mother for more stories about him and watched her eyes go distant before she changed the subject. The anger came in waves. First, a cold shock, like stepping into an ice bath, then heat, building from my chest up through my throat. I pulled up my mother's contact and started typing a text, then deleted it, started again, deleted again. What do you say to someone who's built your entire identity on a foundation of lies? I needed more information. The DNA site had a messaging system. Franklin Ellis had sent me a note, sitting unread in my inbox. Caroline, I think you might be my daughter. I've been looking for you for 30 years. Please, can we talk? Looking for me. For 30 years. I grabbed my keys and headed for my car. It was past midnight, but I didn't care. My mother lived 40 minutes away in the same house where I'd grown up, the house she shared with Rick, my stepfather, the man who'd raised me from age 7 with all the warmth of a prison guard. Rick, who'd made it clear from day one that I was a burden he tolerated for my mother's sake. The drive gave me time to think, to piece together fragments of memory, how my mother would tense up whenever I asked about my father's family, how she'd claimed all his relatives were dead or estranged, how conveniently clean the story was, no loose ends, no one to contradict her version. I pulled into the driveway at 12:53 a.m. The porch light was on. Rick's truck sat in its usual spot, that stupid "protected by Smith & Wesson" sticker on the back window. I could see light coming from the kitchen. My mother answered the door in her robe, face creased with sleep and confusion. Caroline, what's wrong? It's the middle of the night. Who is Franklin Ellis? The change in her expression told me everything. The confusion vanished, replaced by something I'd never seen before, pure, naked fear. Her hand gripped the doorframe. What are you talking about? Franklin Ellis, Mom, my biological father, the one you told me was dead. She started to speak, but Rick appeared behind her, massive in his flannel pajamas. 64 years old, but still built like the forest ranger he'd been before retirement. His presence filled the doorway. What the hell is going on? His voice was gravelly with sleep and irritation. You know what time it is? I'm talking to my mother, I said, not looking at him. About my actual father, the one who's very much alive in Tucson. Rick's face darkened. He pushed past my mother, stepping onto the porch. You need to get back in your car and go home. Sleep it off, whatever this is. I'm not drunk, Rick. I'm asking why I've been lied to my entire life. Because some things are better left buried, my mother said quietly. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, shrinking into her robe. Some things don't need to be dug up. Better for who? I could hear my voice rising. For you. For him. I gestured at Rick. Because it sure as hell wasn't better for me, growing up thinking my father was dead when he was out there looking. Rick's hand moved so fast I didn't see it coming. The crack of his palm against my face was followed by blinding white pain as I stumbled backward, catching myself on the porch railing. You don't come to my house in the middle of the night starting drama, he snarled. Your mother made her choices. Good choices. That man's nothing to you. I touched my cheek, felt the heat already rising from the impact. My mother stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mask I couldn't read. Mom. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Are you going to say something? She looked at Rick, then back at me. When she spoke, her voice was cold as winter. You should have left it alone, Caroline. I told you your father was dead because that was easier than the truth. Some men aren't worth knowing. The words hit harder than Rick's hand. I straightened up, tasting copper where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. And some mothers aren't worth keeping, I said. I turned and walked back to my car, ignoring Rick's voice behind me telling me not to come back until I'd learned some respect. My hands shook as I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing together on the porch, united in their deception, watching me leave. I made it 3 blocks before I had to pull over. The adrenaline was wearing off, and my face throbbed with each heartbeat. I looked at myself in the mirror. A red mark was already forming along my cheekbone, and there was a small cut where Rick's wedding ring had caught the skin. I took out my phone and opened the camera. The flash made me squint, but I needed documentation. 3 photos from different angles. Then I put the car back in drive and headed for the nearest urgent care. The DNA results were still open on my phone. Franklin Ellis, my father, my living father, who'd been looking for me while I'd been mourning a ghost. As I drove through the empty streets of Albuquerque, I made a decision. If they wanted to keep their secrets, fine, but I was done being the only one paying for them. The urgent care center smelled like disinfectant and exhaustion. At 1:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, I wasn't the only one there with a story written in bruises. A woman held ice to her lip while her friend filled out paperwork. A teenager sat with his mother, cradling a wrist that bent at the wrong angle. We all avoided eye contact, united in the particular shame of being hurt by someone who was supposed to care about us. Domestic incident. The intake nurse had kind eyes, but a voice that had asked this question too many times. My stepfather. The words came out flat. I confronted my mother about something. He didn't like it. She nodded, making notes. We'll need to document this. The doctor will have to file a report with the police. It's protocol. I understand. The examination room was cold and too bright. Dr. Patel was young, maybe fresh out of residency, but her hands were gentle as she examined my face. The cut from Rick's ring needed 2 butterfly bandages. Nothing broken, just soft tissue damage that would bloom into purple and yellow over the coming days. This kind of impact trauma, she said carefully, it's concerning, especially from someone you live with or visit regularly. I don't live with them, haven't for years. But you went to their house tonight. I thought about lying, making it simpler, but I was tired of lies. I found out my mother has been lying to me my entire life about who my father is. When I confronted her, my stepfather hit me. She paused in her typing. I'm sorry, that must be incredibly difficult. The lie or the hit? Both. When the officer arrived, I recognized the exhaustion in his eyes. Night shift. Probably his third or fourth domestic call. Officer Martinez took my statement with practiced efficiency, took photos of my injuries with a department camera, asked if I wanted to press charges. What happens if I do? We'd arrest him tonight. He'd probably make bail by morning. There'd be a court date. You'd have to testify. I thought about my mother, standing in that doorway, choosing Rick's violence over my truth. Yes, I want to press charges. He nodded, unsurprised. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? My own apartment. He doesn't have a key. Good. Change your locks anyway. Do you have any documentation of previous incidents? No. This was the first time he's hit me. I paused. At least since I moved out. Martinez's pen stopped moving. There were incidents when you were a minor. The question opened a door I'd kept locked for years. Rick's hands had always been heavy, never enough to leave marks that lasted, never where anyone could see, just enough to remind me that I was unwanted, that my presence in his house was conditional on my silence and compliance. Nothing I can prove now, I said finally. He gave me his card, told me a detective would follow up in the morning. I drove home feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left only the shell. My apartment felt different when I walked in. Same secondhand furniture, same dying succulent on the windowsill, but now it felt like a sanctuary. I locked the door, put on the chain, and finally let myself cry. Not for the pain in my face, for the 13-year-old girl who'd learned to make herself small, for the 18-year-old who'd stood at a stranger's grave with wilted carnations, for all the versions of myself who'd believed the story, because the alternative that my mother had chosen comfortable lies over difficult truths was too painful to consider. I made coffee instead of going to bed, opened my laptop and went back to the DNA site. Franklin Ellis had included an email address in his message. I stared at it for a long time before opening a new message. Mr. Ellis? My name is Caroline. I just received my DNA results tonight. I'm the daughter of Linda Peterson, maiden name Linda Marsh. I was born in Albuquerque on April 15, 1991. I was told my entire life that my father died when I was 2. I'd very much like to speak with you. Please call me at... I hit send before I could change my mind. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m., unknown Tucson number. Caroline. The voice was deep, uncertain. This is Franklin. I got your email. I'm sorry to call so early, but I've been awake all night. Is this really you? It's me, my voice cracked. I don't know what to say. I only found out you existed 7 hours ago. God, he let out a shaky breath. I've been looking for you since 1993. Your mother disappeared when you were 2. Changed her name. I think I hired private investigators, but it was like you both vanished. She told me you were dead, said your name was James Reeves, that you died in a motorcycle accident. Silence. Then, I've never owned a motorcycle in my life, and I very much wanted to know my daughter. We talked for an hour. He told me about searching, about the other children he'd had with his wife, my half-siblings who knew about me, who'd grown up hearing about their missing sister. He told me about keeping his DNA profile updated on every ancestry site, hoping I'd eventually test. I told him about growing up with Rick, about the grave I'd visited every Father's Day, about the violence that had finally shattered the fiction. He hit you. Franklin's voice went hard. This man put his hands on my daughter. It was strange, hearing protective anger from a stranger, but he wasn't really a stranger. Was he? He was my father, my living, searching, furious father. I pressed charges, I said. The police should be arresting him this morning. Good. Do you need anything? A lawyer, money for medical bills. I can be in Albuquerque in 6 hours. The offer made my throat tight. I don't know. I don't know what I need. That's okay. We have time to figure it out. We have time now. After we hung up, I sat in my living room watching the sunrise through dirty windows. My phone buzzed with texts from my mother. I didn't read them. At 7:30, Officer Martinez called to tell me Rick had been arrested at his home without incident. He'd been charged with assault and battery. Bail hearing would be that afternoon. I called in sick to work, something I never did. My supervisor sounded concerned I'd worked there 8 years and could count my sick days on one hand. Family emergency, I told her, which was true enough. My face had darkened overnight, purple spreading across my cheekbone like spilled wine. I took more photos, better documentation in the morning light. Then I opened my laptop again and started typing. I wrote down everything I could remember, every accident from my childhood, every time Rick had grabbed too hard, shoved too roughly, made sure I knew my place. I wrote about my mother's silence, her careful deflections, her choice to protect a lie rather than protect me. And I wrote about Franklin Ellis, the father who'd been erased, who'd spent 30 years looking for a daughter he'd never forgotten. By noon, I had 15 pages, a timeline of deception, violence, and lost chances. I saved it in 3 places, emailed a copy to myself, and printed a hard copy that I put in my filing cabinet. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I blocked my mother's number. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a legal pad. Ms. Peterson, I'm Patricia Hoffman from the District Attorney's Office. I'm here about your case against Richard Hayward. I let her in, made coffee while she sat up at my kitchen table. She was thorough, asking questions that made me remember details I'd buried. How long had the violence been happening? Had anyone witnessed previous incidents? Did I have any documentation? There's something else, I said when she'd finished the assault questions. I think he's been stealing my identity. Patricia Hoffman's pen stopped moving. Identity theft. What makes you think that? Just a feeling, I said, not ready to reveal my suspicions yet. Some strange charges on old credit reports, things that didn't add up. She made a note. You should pull your full credit history, check for accounts you didn't open. If you find anything, document it, and let me know immediately. Identity theft charges could significantly impact his sentencing. After she left, I sat at my computer with fresh coffee and a growing sense of dread. I'd been meticulous about my finances since college, a habit born from watching my mother struggle with money and Rick's expensive hunting trips while I wore secondhand clothes. But I'd never done a deep dive into my credit history. The first report seemed clean. Credit cards I recognized, student loans I was still paying off, my car loan. But then I switched to a different credit bureau, one that showed closed accounts. There it was, a mortgage loan from 2013 originated through a regional bank. Amount $45,000. Property address a rental house on the south side of town. The account had been closed in 2018, paid in full. I stared at the screen. In 2013, I'd been 22, fresh out of college, making $31,000 a year at my first job. No bank would have given me a mortgage, and I'd never lived at that address. I pulled up property records. The house had been purchased by R&L Holdings, LLC in 2013 and sold in 2018 for $78,000. A tidy profit. R&L Holdings. Rick and Linda. My hands shook as I kept digging. Another credit bureau showed a personal loan from 2015. $15,000. Paid off within 6 months. The application listed my employer correctly but showed an income twice what I'd actually been making. The signature on the documents was close to mine, too close, but I could see the differences now, the way the C in Caroline curved too much, how the E endings were sharper than my natural handwriting. I found 3 more loans over the years, all opened when I was between apartments, using my mother's address, all paid back just before they would have appeared on my regular credit monitoring. Professional, calculated, hidden in the gaps where I wasn't looking. The rage that filled me was cold and precise. This wasn't just about lies anymore. They'd used me as a financial tool, risked my future for their profit, and my mother had to have known. The loans used her address. The LLC was in both their names. I printed everything: credit reports, loan documents, property records, incorporation papers for R&L Holdings. The stack grew thick on my kitchen table. Then I called Patricia Hoffman. "You were right to check," she said after I'd explained. "This changes things significantly. We'll need to involve Financial Crimes Division. Can you come to the station tomorrow?" "Yes." "And Caroline? You might want to consider freezing your credit immediately." I did it that night, putting blocks on all 3 credit bureaus. Then I went through every financial account I had, changing passwords, adding 2-factor authentication, setting up alerts for any activity. It took hours, but the systematic process calmed the storm in my chest. My phone rang as I was finishing. Franklin again. "I'm sorry to keep calling," he said. I have 30 years of questions." "It's okay. I'm glad you're calling." We talked about safer things this time. He told me about his work as an electrical engineer, about my half-sister Maria, who was a nurse, my half-brothers David and Michael, who ran a construction business together, a whole family I'd never known existed. "Your mother," he said carefully, "when I knew her, she was different, ambitious, yes, but not cruel, not deceptive." "People change," I said, thinking of the woman who'd stood silent while Rick's ring split my skin. "I suppose they do. Or maybe we only see what we want to see." "Tell me about when you met." So he did. They'd worked at the same semiconductor plant in Phoenix. She was an admin assistant. He was a junior engineer. They'd dated for 2 years. Had me. Then when I was 18 months old, she'd started talking about feeling trapped, wanting more from life. He'd come home from a business trip to find their apartment empty. No note, no forwarding address, just gone. "I thought she'd come back," he said. "I kept the apartment for a year, kept paying for it even after I moved, just in case. The police said she hadn't committed a crime. Adults can leave if they want to, even adults with children. She told me you abandoned us, said you weren't ready for a family." He was quiet for a long moment. "I've made mistakes in my life. Caroline, many of them, but wanting you was never one of them." After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my living room, processing the archaeology of lies I'd uncovered. Every story had another story beneath it. Every truth revealed 2 more deceptions. My mother had been 24 when she'd had me, 25 when she'd taken me and vanished, reinvented herself as a widow, found Rick and his Forest Service pension, built a life on the foundation of my father's absence. She'd traded Franklin's potential for Rick's certainty, his steady paycheck, and his willingness to ask no questions about her past. And I'd been the collateral damage, the inconvenient reminder of her previous life, useful only as a financial tool and a burden to be managed. I pulled out the printed photos of my face, the bruise now fully developed in purple and yellow glory. Then I opened my laptop and began composing an email I never thought I'd write. "Dear Mom," I typed, then deleted it. Started again. "Linda," I wrote instead. Using her first name felt like reclaiming power. "By now you know that Rick has been arrested. What you might not know is that I've discovered the loans, all of them, R&L Holdings, the mortgage fraud, the identity theft going back to 2013. I've provided all documentation to the district attorney's office. Financial Crimes Division will be contacting you soon. I also want you to know that I've been in contact with Franklin Ellis, my father, the one you told me was dead while he spent 30 years looking for us. He seems like a good man. I'm glad I'll have the chance to know him. Don't contact me. Don't come to my apartment. Any necessary communication can go through my lawyer. I spent my entire life believing your stories. The grieving widow, the struggling single mother who found love again, the family just trying to make it work. But that was never our story. Was it our story was about a woman who stole her daughter's father, her identity, and her trust, who stood silent while her husband drew blood. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. Caroline. P.S. I've changed my locks. I attached one photo, my bruised face in the harsh hospital lighting. Then I added the first page of the credit report, showing the fraudulent mortgage, just enough to let her know I wasn't bluffing. I hit send at 3:47 a.m., then I finally went to bed, sleeping better than I had in years. Despite the pain in my face, tomorrow there would be police interviews and paperwork and difficult conversations, but tonight, for the first time in my life, I told my mother the complete truth. The power of that honesty felt like coming home. The financial crimes detective was nothing like Officer Martinez. Detective Sarah Walsh had the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen every scam, every con, every desperate attempt to game the system. She spread my documentation across the conference room table like evidence in a murder case. "This is thorough," she said, examining the loan documents. "How did you think to look for these?" "I work in systems auditing," I explained. "Once I suspected something was off, I knew where to dig. Lucky for us, most victims don't discover identity theft until their credit is destroyed." She held up the mortgage paperwork. "This signature, you're certain it's not yours?" "Positive. Look at the lease agreement for my apartment that year." I slid another paper across the table. "That's my actual signature. See how the letters connect differently." She compared them with a magnifier. "The forgery's good. Practiced. This wasn't their first attempt." "You think they've done this before?" "In my experience, people who commit successful identity theft rarely stop at one victim." She pulled out her phone. "I'm going to need a forensic accountant to review everything. This could take time." "How much time?" "Months. Potentially. Financial crimes move slowly. But," she looked at me directly, "the assault charge will proceed immediately. That's actually in your favor. If he's convicted on the assault, it establishes a pattern of victimization that strengthens the fraud case." I left the police station with a case number and a growing understanding of how deep this went. On impulse, I drove to the bank that had issued the fraudulent mortgage. The branch manager, a middle-aged woman named Denise, pulled the archived records after verifying my identity. "This loan was flagged internally in 2016, she said, frowning at her screen. "Irregular payment patterns, but it was eventually paid in full, so no action was taken." "Irregular how?" "Large cash deposits to pay it down, just under the reporting threshold." She looked at me over her glasses. Someone knew exactly how to avoid triggering federal notices. Rick, former federal employee with the Forest Service. He'd known the system, known the limits, known how to dance right up to the edge without crossing it. I thought of all those hunting trips he'd taken, the expensive gear, the new truck every few years while my mother clipped coupons. Had it all been funded by loans in my name? That evening, I met with the lawyer Patricia Hoffman had recommended. Martin Chen was young but came highly recommended for both criminal and civil cases. His office was small but meticulous. Every file labeled, every surface clear except for the documents related to my case. "Identity theft by family members is more common than people think," he said, reviewing my evidence. "It's also harder to prosecute, shared addresses, legitimate access to personal information, but this," he tapped the forged signatures, "this shows clear intent to defraud. What's my exposure here? Could I be held liable for any of these loans?" "Unlikely, given the evidence, but we'll need to formally dispute everything with the credit bureaus, file police reports for each instance, and potentially sue to clear your name completely." He leaned back. "Have you considered a civil suit beyond the criminal charges?" "For damages." "For damages, yes, but also for emotional distress, lost opportunities. You said you've been monitoring your credit obsessively for years, that you've avoided certain financial moves out of fear. That's quantifiable damage." I thought about the house I'd never tried to buy. Convinced my credit wasn't good enough despite my careful management. The business loan I'd never applied for. The opportunities passed by because I thought I couldn't afford the risk. All while Rick and my mother were using my name like a corporate credit card. "I want them to pay," I said quietly. "Not just criminally. I want them to understand what they cost me." Martin nodded. "We can make that happen. But first, let's focus on protecting you. Have they tried to contact you since the arrest?" 12 missed calls from my mother, I blocked her number. Good. Keep it that way. Any communication goes through me now. He slid a business card across the desk. That's my cell. Call any time if they show up, or if you discover any other fraudulent activity. I spent the next 3 days in a routine that felt like archaeology, digging through old papers, requesting records from banks and credit unions, mapping the timeline of fraud. Each discovery felt like another betrayal: a credit card opened during my college graduation week, a personal loan taken out the month I'd been in the hospital with appendicitis. They'd used my vulnerable moments, the times when I was distracted or overwhelmed, to steal pieces of my financial identity. It was surgical in its precision. Franklin called every evening, careful not to overwhelm me but clearly hungry for connection. On the 4th night, he offered again to come to Albuquerque. I could help, he said, or just be there, whatever you need. I'm not ready yet, I admitted. I need to sort through this first. Need to understand who I am without all the lies. I get that. But Caroline, you're not defined by what they did to you. You're defined by how you're handling it now, and from where I'm sitting, you're handling it with incredible strength. His words stayed with me as I prepared for Rick's bail hearing. Martin had advised me to attend, to show the court that I was taking this seriously. I dressed carefully professional blazer, minimal makeup that didn't hide the fading bruise, evidence of violence in a respectable package. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Rick sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his attorney beside him. He'd aged in the 4 days since his arrest, his face gray and drawn. My mother sat in the gallery behind him, wearing the black dress she saved for funerals. She tried to catch my eye when I walked in. I looked through her like she was a stranger. The prosecutor outlined the charges: assault and battery, with additional charges pending from the financial crimes investigation. Rick's attorney argued for minimal bail, emphasizing his lack of criminal record, his community ties, his years of federal service. Then the prosecutor called me to testify. Ms. Peterson, she asked after I was sworn in, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? He's my stepfather, has been since I was 7 years old. And can you describe what happened on the night in question? I told the story simply, factually: the DNA test, the confrontation, the blow that came when I asked about my biological father. I kept my voice steady, even when describing the sound Rick's ring made against my cheekbone. Has the defendant ever been violent with you before? Rick's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Yes, I said, looking directly at Rick for the first time. Throughout my childhood, never enough to require hospital visits, but enough to ensure I knew my place in his household. My mother's sharp intake of breath echoed in the small courtroom. The judge set bail at $50,000. Higher than Rick's attorney had requested, but lower than the prosecutor had wanted. He also issued a restraining order. Rick was to have no contact with me, directly or through third parties. As they led Rick back to holding to process his bail, he turned to look at me. The fury in his eyes was mixed with something else. Fear, maybe, or the dawning recognition that the silent, scared girl he'd controlled for so many years no longer existed. Outside the courthouse, my mother was waiting by my car. Martin had warned me this might happen, told me to document everything. I pulled out my phone, started recording. You need to leave, I said clearly. The restraining order includes third-party contact. Caroline, please, just let me explain. Explain what? The loans, the forged signatures, or how about explaining why you told me my father was dead while he searched for me for 30 years? She flinched. You don't understand. Franklin he couldn't give us the life we needed. Rick could, he has. The life you needed, I corrected. Built on my credit, funded by fraud, maintained by violence. It wasn't supposed to be like this. No, I agreed. It was supposed to stay secret. I was supposed to stay quiet and grateful and never ask questions. But I asked one question too many. Didn't I? She reached for me, and I stepped back. The police will be contacting you about the financial fraud, I said. My attorney will be in touch about the civil suit. Don't come to my home. Don't come to my work. Don't contact me again. I got in my car and drove away, watching in the rearview mirror as she stood in the parking lot, growing smaller with each block. By the time I reached the highway, she disappeared entirely, like a bad dream fading in daylight. That night, I wrote another email, this time to Franklin. I think I'm ready for that visit now. Franklin arrived on Saturday morning, driving a sensible Honda Accord that somehow made me trust him more. I watched from my apartment window as he parked, saw him check the address twice before getting out. He was shorter than I'd imagined, with silver hair and my exact nose. When he looked up at the building, I saw my own eyes reflected back at me. I met him at the entrance. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before he opened his arms. A question more than an assumption. I stepped into the hug, and 33 years of absence collapsed into that single moment. "You look like your grandmother," he said when we pulled apart, his voice thick. "She passed 5 years ago. I'm sorry you never got to meet her." Another loss to add to the tally. We went upstairs, and I made coffee while he looked around my apartment, taking in the sparse decorations, the minimal furniture, the life I'd built to be mobile, ready to leave at any moment. "I have photos," he said, pulling out a tablet. "If you want to see them." We sat on my second-hand couch, and he showed me a life I should have known. My grandmother, Elena, a teacher who'd raised 4 children after my grandfather died young, my aunts and uncles, cousins I'd never met, birthday parties and Christmas gatherings and family vacations I'd never been part of. "This is Maria," he said, showing me a woman who could have been my sister, because she was my sister. "She's been the most eager to meet you, and here are David and Michael." My brothers, the word felt foreign in my mind. They were twins, apparently, both with Franklin's quiet smile and their mother's red hair. "Does your wife?" I started. "Patricia knows everything, has from the beginning. She helped me search for you, actually. Never made me feel like I was betraying our family by looking for my first daughter." We talked through lunch, ordering pizza when neither of us wanted to break the conversation to cook. He told me about his work, his life, the family I'd been stolen from. I told him about growing up with Rick's casual cruelty and my mother's calculated lies. "I keep thinking about what she said," I admitted. "That you couldn't give us the life we needed. But what life did she think I needed, one built on fraud?" "Your mother was always ambitious," Franklin said carefully. "When I knew her, she talked about wanting more than a technician's salary could provide. I think she saw me as limited. My fault was being content with a middle-class life." While Rick offered her the promise of his federal pension and the willingness to break laws for extra income. "It seems so," he paused, choosing his words. "Have you found more beyond what you've told me?" That afternoon, I showed him everything. The forensic accounting I'd been doing, the pattern of loans and fraud that went back a decade. He studied it with an engineer's eye for detail, mapping the timeline on a legal pad. "They were systematic," he said. "This loan here, right after this one was paid off, never overlapping, never enough to trigger automatic reviews. They knew exactly what they were doing." The detective said the same thing, that it was too precise to be their first time. Franklin set down his pen. "Caroline, I need to tell you something. When your mother left, she cleaned out our joint savings, not enough for me to pursue legally, and I was more focused on finding you than the money. But if she was willing to do that to me, you think she's done this before, to other people. I think someone who builds a life on lies doesn't start with the biggest ones." That evening, I called Detective Walsh and shared Franklin's information. She thanked me, said it would help establish a pattern of behavior. Then I did something I'd been dreading. I reached out to an old friend from high school who'd become a private investigator. Marla responded within an hour. "Caroline, I heard about Rick's arrest. Are you okay?" We met for coffee the next morning, Franklin insisting on coming along for safety. Marla hadn't changed much, same sharp eyes, same preference for black coffee and brutal honesty. "I need background on my mother," I told her. "Before she met my father, before she had me, who was Linda Marsh?" "You sure you want to know?" "Sometimes the truth is worse than the mystery." I thought about the bruise on my face, the loans in my name, the father I'd been denied. The lies have already done their damage. I need the truth now. Marla quoted me a rate, said she'd start immediately. Franklin insisted on paying, calling it 30 years of back child support. I was too tired to argue. That night, as Franklin prepared to drive back to Tucson, we stood in my parking lot under the New Mexico stars. "I wish I'd found you sooner," he said. "I wish I'd tried harder." "You never stop trying. That matters. Will you come to Tucson meet everyone? Patricia's already planning a dinner, and Maria's threatened to drive up here if you don't come soon." "After the trial," I promised. "After this is finished, I want to meet them as myself, not as this victim." "You're not a victim," he said firmly. "You're a survivor, and you're my daughter. Nothing they did changes that." The week that followed was a blur of legal meetings and continued discovery. Marla worked fast, uncovering a trail that led back to Amarillo, Texas. Linda Marsh had been Linda Garrett before that. And before that, traces disappeared into sealed juvenile records and changed names. "Your mother's a ghost," Marla told me over secure email. "But ghosts leave patterns. I'll keep digging." The financial investigation expanded. Detective Walsh called to tell me they'd found 2 more victims, a coworker of Rick's from the Forest Service and my mother's former employer from a medical office. Both had discovered loans they'd never taken out, all traced back to documents with expert forgeries. "We're building a RICO case," she explained. "This goes beyond identity theft. This is organized fraud." I thought about my mother in that courtroom, wearing her funeral dress. Had she been mourning the loss of her criminal enterprise, or just the loss of control over me? Martin, my attorney, was ecstatic about the development. RICO changes everything: federal charges, serious prison time, and for the civil case, the damages just multiplied exponentially. But I found myself thinking less about the money and more about the pattern. How many people had they hurt? How many victims had never discovered the theft? Were still paying for loans they'd never taken out. One evening, I got an unexpected call. Patricia Hoffman from the DA's office. "Caroline, I wanted to give you a heads up. Rick's attorney is shopping a plea deal. He's willing to testify against your mother in exchange for reduced charges. He's turning on her. Self-preservation. He's looking at significant federal time now. Your mother was apparently the mastermind. According to his attorney, he was just the muscle." I almost laughed. Rick, who'd terrorized me for 26 years, claiming to be just the muscle. But it made sense in its way. My mother had always been the planner, the one who made things happen. Rick had been her enforcement, her threat. What does this mean for the assault charge? That proceeds regardless, but his cooperation on the federal charges could affect his sentencing. I wanted you to be prepared. I thanked her and sat in my quiet apartment, processing this new betrayal, even facing prison. They were turning on each other. The family they'd built on lies was crumbling from within. My phone buzzed with a text from Franklin. "Thinking of you. Remember, you're stronger than their worst choices." The bruise on my face had faded to yellow-green, barely visible now, but the strength I'd found in speaking the truth, in refusing to be silent any longer, that was permanent. I pulled out my laptop and began writing. Not a legal document this time, but a letter to my half-siblings. Maria, David, and Michael deserved to know their sister not as a victim or a case file, but as a person ready to join a family built on truth instead of lies. "Dear Maria, David, and Michael," I began. "Our father has probably told you about me by now. I wanted to introduce myself properly. As I wrote, I felt the walls I'd built starting to crack. For the first time in my life, I was reaching toward family instead of running from it. The difference was simple: these people had never lied to me. They'd been waiting for me to come home to a place I'd never been. And maybe that's what truth did. It created space for real connections where lies had only left emptiness. Tomorrow there would be more discoveries, more legal proceedings, more unraveling of the fiction my mother had woven. But tonight, I was writing to my sister and brothers, telling them about my favorite books and my job and my terrible cooking, building the beginning of something real. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother had stolen my father to build a false family, but in exposing her lies, I'd found my true one. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My old laptop from 2015 buried in my closet behind winter coats I never wore in New Mexico. I'd kept it out of habit, the same way I kept receipts and bank statements, a paper trail of a life lived carefully. But I'd forgotten one crucial detail. My mother had borrowed it for a week that year when her computer died. "Always back up everything," she'd said, returning it with thanks. "You never know when technology will fail you." The irony of her words hit me as I powered on the ancient machine. It wheezed to life, the screen flickering before steadying. I navigated to the email client, my hands trembling slightly. She wouldn't have been careless enough to leave her main account logged in, but everyone had secondary emails, recovery addresses, forgotten accounts. There it was, LM Hayward 1967 gmail.com, still logged in, still active in the archived mail folder. The emails went back 3 years from when she'd used my laptop. Hundreds of them. My mother, the meticulous planner, had forgotten to log out of her backup account. I started reading, and the world I thought I knew shifted again. Rick won't ask questions as long as the money keeps coming. One email read, "Sent to an address I didn't recognize. The girl's credit is still clean. We can use it for the Murphy Street property." The girl, not my daughter, not Caroline, the girl. Another email, this one from Rick to my mother. "She's getting too curious, asking about college funds, wants to see bank statements. Handle it." The response, "I'll tell her we're broke. She'll take out student loans. More credit history for us to use later." I sat back, nausea rolling through my stomach. Every struggle, every sacrifice I'd made thinking we were poor, it had all been orchestrated. They'd had money. They just wanted mine more. But the worst was yet to come. An email chain from 2009 when I was 18. The subject line, "Birth certificate issue." "The seal looks wrong," Rick had written. "If she tries to get a passport, they'll flag it." My mother's response was clinical. "I'll handle it. Tell her we can't afford vacation anyway. By the time she needs it for work, we'll have a better solution." My birth certificate, the one document that proved who I was, and even that was fake. I called Martin immediately, forgetting it was past midnight. "I found their emails," I said without preamble. 3 years' worth. They discuss everything, the fraud, the forgeries, keeping me from finding out about my father. "Don't touch anything else," he said, suddenly wide awake. "Don't forward anything. Don't delete anything. Take photos with your phone for now. I'll get a computer forensics expert there first thing in the morning." But I couldn't stop reading. Each email revealed another layer of betrayal. They'd sabotaged a job opportunity in Phoenix because it was too close to where Franklin lived. They'd intercepted mail from DNA testing companies twice before I hadn't been the first to suspect the truth. And then, in an attachment titled Insurance, I found the motherlode. Audio files. Dozens of them. My hands shook as I plugged in headphones and clicked the first one. Rick's voice filled my ears. "If this goes south, I'm not going down alone. You promised me easy money. Linda, this is getting complicated." My mother's response was ice cold. "Nothing's complicated if you don't overthink it. The girl trusts me. That's all we need." I listened to file after file, recordings of their planning sessions, their arguments, their casual discussions of my life like I was a business venture. In one, they debated whether to let me date seriously. "Boyfriends ask questions," my mother said. "Better to keep her isolated." "She's already isolated," Rick laughed. "Kid barely has friends. You did good there." By dawn, I documented everything I could without touching the computer further. The forensics expert, a young woman named Angela, arrived at 7 with a van full of equipment. "This is evidence gold," she said after her initial assessment. "The metadata alone will prove when these were created and accessed. Do you have somewhere else to be for a few hours? This is going to take time." I drove aimlessly through Albuquerque. eventually ending up at the cemetery where I'd left flowers for a fictional father. James Reeves's headstone stood among others, weather-worn and legitimate-looking. How had my mother arranged this, another forgery, a real grave with a convenient name? My phone rang. Detective Walsh. Caroline, where are you? We need you to come in immediately. What's wrong? Your mother's been arrested. She was trying to leave the state with significant cash withdrawals. And Caroline? She had a notebook with her. It has information about other identities. We think you weren't the first. The federal building downtown hummed with activity. I was led to a conference room where Detective Walsh waited with 2 FBI agents. The older one, Agent Martinez, no relation to the officer from that first night, spread photos across the table. Your mother has been Linda Peterson, Linda Hayward, Linda Marsh, Linda Garrett, and at least 2 other variations we're tracking. The notebook contains details on 11 different victims over 25 years. 11. I stared at the pages of my mother's neat handwriting, each entry a life she'd stolen from. The early ones were coworkers, boyfriends, employers. Agent Martinez continued. Small amounts, testing the system. You represented her most ambitious project, long-term, systematic, with built-in emotional control. Because I loved her, I said quietly. Because you trusted her, he corrected. That's what predators like your mother count on. The assumption that family wouldn't hurt you. They showed me photos from her arrest. She'd dyed her hair black, had glasses I'd never seen her wear, carried a driver's license with another name, even facing federal charges. She was ready to become someone else, leave Linda Peterson behind like she'd left Linda Marsh. Will she make bail? I asked. Flight risk, the younger agent said. With multiple identities and hidden assets, no judge will grant bail. Hidden assets, of course. All those loans, all that stolen money had to have gone somewhere beyond Rick's hunting gear and their modest lifestyle. We need your help, Detective Walsh said. You know her patterns better than anyone. Where would she hide money? I thought about my childhood, the places she'd valued, the habits I'd absorbed without realizing. She always said banks were for fools, kept cash in books inside the dust jackets, had a safety deposit box at 3 different banks, always paid in cash, and I paused, remembering. She collected coins, rare ones, said they held value better than stocks. Agent Martinez made notes. We'll get warrants. Anything else? Check storage units near truck stops. She always said they were anonymous, cash only, no questions asked. And look for units rented around tax season. That's when she was most paranoid. They kept me for 3 more hours, mining my memories for clues I didn't know I had. By the time I left, the sun was setting, painting Albuquerque's sky in shades of amber and rose. Angela called as I drove home. I've recovered everything. Your attorney will have the full report tomorrow. But Caroline, that recording in the insurance folder, the one dated last month, you need to hear it. I pulled into a parking lot, bracing myself. It's your mother and Rick discussing what to do if you ever found out. Rick suggests they could handle you permanently. Your mother's response is what matters. She sent me the file. I listened to Rick's casual suggestion of violence, the way he discussed ending my life like discussing pest control. Then my mother's voice, calm as ever. Don't be stupid. She's worth more alive. We just need to break her first. Make her think she's crazy. I've been preparing for this for years. Gaslighting, future tense. She'd been preparing to destroy my sense of reality if I ever learned the truth. I sat in that parking lot as darkness fell, processing the fact that my mother had contingency plans for breaking my mind, that I'd been living not just with liars and thieves, but with people who discussed my potential murder as a business decision. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria, my half-sister. Dad told us you found more evidence. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I stared at her message, this offer of support from a stranger who shared my DNA, who'd grown up knowing love without price tags. I'm not okay, I typed back, but I will be. It was the first time I'd admitted that out loud. Even in text, I wasn't okay. Maybe wouldn't be for a long time, but I would be. eventually, because I'd survived 26 years of their worst and was still standing. As I drove home to my empty apartment with its new locks and its ugly secondhand furniture and its beautiful view of mountains that didn't lie, I thought about the notebook Agent Martinez had shown me, 11 victims over 25 years, but also 11 people who could now get justice, 11 families who would learn the truth, 11 stories that would finally make sense. I'd broken the pattern, and in breaking it, I'd broken them. The dashboard clock read 8:47 p.m., somewhere in federal holding. My mother was sitting in a cell, out of identities to hide behind, somewhere else. Rick was probably negotiating his plea deal, ready to sell out the woman he'd called his wife for a lighter sentence. And here I was, driving home through familiar streets that looked different now that I knew the truth. Every lie they'd told had been a bar in my cage, but I'd found the key, hidden in a dusty laptop and a DNA test, and the courage to say enough. Tomorrow there would be more revelations, more evidence, more unraveling of their careful construction. But tonight, I was going to order Thai food from my favorite place, call Franklin to tell him I was safe, and maybe write another letter to siblings I'd never known I had. The truth hadn't set me free easily. It had come with bruises and betrayals, and the complete destruction of the life I'd thought I'd lived, but it had set me free nonetheless. And that was more than Linda Marsh Garrett Peterson, whoever she really was, could say tonight. The visit to my mother in federal holding came 3 weeks after her arrest. Martin had advised against it, but I needed to see her one last time, needed to look her in the eyes knowing what I now knew. She sat across from me in orange, her dyed hair growing out at the roots, revealing gray I'd never seen before. Without her careful makeup and styled clothes, she looked smaller, older, ordinary, just another inmate in a room full of broken families. "You look tired," she said, as if we were meeting for coffee. "I've been busy, helping the FBI trace 25 years of fraud." Her face didn't change. That perfect mask she'd worn my whole life stayed firmly in place. "I suppose you're proud of yourself?" "No," I said honestly. "There's nothing to be proud of here. Just truth." "Truth?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You want truth? The truth is I gave you a stable home, food, clothes, education, more than I ever had. Funded by identity theft, built on lies about my father." "Your precious father." The mask cracked slightly, showing something raw underneath. "You think he wanted you. He was relieved when we left, made his life simpler. He searched for 30 years. He searched for the idea of you. The reality would have disappointed him, just like you disappointed me." The words should have hurt. Once, they would have destroyed me. But sitting there, seeing her for what she truly was, a woman so empty she had to steal other people's identities to feel real, I felt only pity. "Mom," I said, using the title one last time. "I need to know something. My birth certificate. Is anything on it real?" She studied me for a long moment. "You were born on April 15th. That's true. The rest?" She shrugged. "I improved it." "Where?" "Does it matter you're Caroline Peterson? I made you that. Without me, you're nobody." "Without you," I said quietly, "I'm free." I stood to leave, but her voice stopped me at the door. "Caroline, that recording, the one about breaking you, I want you to know something." She waited until I turned back. "I wouldn't have needed to break you. You were already broken. So desperate for love you would have forgiven anything. Eventually. Just like all the others." I left without responding. There was nothing to say to someone who saw love as weakness, who viewed human connection as something to exploit. But as I walked through the security checkpoints back to freedom, I thought about her words, the others, how many had forgiven her, had chosen family over justice, had let her continue her decades of theft. I hadn't, and that, more than anything, was why she'd finally been stopped. The trial preparations consumed the next month. The FBI had uncovered a staggering network of fraud, storage units full of cash and gold coins, bank accounts under false names, a safety deposit box containing blank birth certificates, social security cards, and the tools for creating entirely new identities. Your mother wasn't just an identity thief, Agent Martinez told me during one of our sessions. She was a one-woman forgery operation. We think she was selling identities to others as well. The scope kept expanding. 3 of the 11 victims in her notebook were deceased, their identities still being used for various schemes. One was a child who died at 3. My mother had been collecting benefits in her name for 20 years. Through it all, Franklin was my anchor. He drove up every weekend, bringing terrible dad jokes and photos of family gatherings I'd missed. Maria came with him once, and we spent an awkward afternoon trying to compress 33 years into small talk over coffee. I always wondered, she said eventually, what it would be like to have a sister. Mom, our mom, she saved all the clothes from when I was little. Said she had a feeling you'd come home someday. Patricia, Franklin's wife, had saved baby clothes for a stepdaughter she'd never met. My mother had saved forged documents and stolen credit cards. The contrast was so sharp it made my chest ache. Rick's plea deal went through a week before my mother's trial. He got 15 years with possibility of parole in 10, contingent on his testimony. I attended that hearing too, watching him throw my mother under every available bus to save himself. She masterminded everything, he testified. I was just muscle. She had the connections, the knowledge. She'd done this before I met her. His testimony revealed more victims, earlier scams, a pattern going back to before I was born. My mother watched from the defendant's table, her face giving away nothing as her husband of 26 years detailed every crime, every lie, every calculated betrayal. When it was over, when Rick was led away to begin his sentence, she turned to look at me. For just a moment, the mask slipped entirely. What I saw underneath wasn't anger or regret or even hatred. It was nothing, a void where human emotion should have been. Martin prepared me carefully for my own testimony. We went over every document, every recording, every piece of evidence I'd discovered. The federal prosecutors had built an airtight case, but my testimony would humanize it, would show the jury the personal cost of her crimes. They need to see you, he explained, not just as a victim, but as someone who survived, who stopped her when others couldn't. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with the box of evidence I'd compiled, the paper trail of a life built on lies. At the bottom was something I'd almost forgotten, a photo from my 8th birthday. My mother and I at a park, her arm around me, both of us smiling at the camera. I studied her face in that photo, looking for signs of the void I'd seen in the courtroom. But all I saw was a woman playing a role, performing motherhood like an actress who'd memorized her lines but never felt them. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Tom Willis. I saw the news about the trial. Your mother was Linda Garrett when I knew her. She destroyed my credit, my marriage, my life. Thank you for stopping her. As the trial date approached, more messages came. Other victims, people who'd suffered in silence, who'd been told they were crazy for suspecting her, who'd given up on justice because she'd vanished into another identity. Each message strengthened my resolve. I wrote my victim impact statement the morning of the trial, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd discovered the first fraudulent loan. I wrote about the father I'd been denied, the childhood lived in fear, the gaslighting that had made me question my own reality, but mostly, I wrote about the strength it took to choose truth over family, justice over silence. Linda Peterson taught me many things, I wrote. She taught me to keep records, to question everything, to trust but verify. She taught me these things so I could help her steal. Instead, I used them to stop her. The greatest irony of her life is that she trained the person who would finally hold her accountable. The courthouse was packed the morning of the trial. Media, victims, curious onlookers drawn by the sensational story of a mother-daughter identity theft ring. I sat in the front row with Franklin on one side and Maria on the other, my chosen family flanking me as I prepared to face the woman who'd raised me. The prosecutor's opening statement was devastating. 27 years of crime, 15 confirmed victims, over $2 million in theft and fraud. They showed charts, timelines, the meticulous documentation of a criminal enterprise that had operated in plain sight for decades. The defendant didn't just steal money, the prosecutor said. She stole identities, opportunities, futures. She stole a daughter's father, a child's trust, and countless victims' peace of mind. She built an empire on other people's ruins. My mother sat at the defense table in a conservative suit, her hair returned to its natural color, looking every inch the respectable middle-aged woman she'd pretended to be. Her attorney painted her as a victim herself of poverty, of limited opportunities, of a system that had failed her. But then they played the recordings. Her voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating as she discussed my worth as a financial asset, as she planned contingencies for my potential murder, as she laughed about the isolation she'd cultivated in me. The jury's faces told the story. Whatever sympathy her attorney had tried to build evaporated in the face of her own words. When they called me to testify, I walked to the witness stand on steady legs. I'd been preparing for this moment since the night she stood silent while Rick's ring split my skin. "State your name for the record." "Caroline Peterson," I said, then paused. Although I'm not certain that's entirely accurate, given what I've learned about my birth certificate. The prosecutor smiled slightly. "Let's start there. Ms. Peterson, tell the jury about discovering your birth certificate was forged." And so I did. For 3 hours, I laid out the story of discovering lie after lie, fraud after fraud. I kept my voice steady, factual, letting the evidence speak rather than emotion. But when they asked about the impact, about what it meant to discover your entire life was built on someone else's crimes, my voice finally cracked. "I don't know who I really am," I admitted. "Every document that proves my identity might be forged. Every memory might be manipulation. She didn't just steal my credit. She stole my ability to trust my own history." The defense attorney tried to paint me as ungrateful, vindictive, mentally unstable. But I had receipts for everything, every claim she made. I had documentation to refute every supposed act of maternal love. I had evidence of the financial motive behind it. "Isn't it true," he asked desperately, "that Linda Peterson raised you, fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head?" "Yes," I said. "Paid for with loans in my name, wages stolen from her employers, and benefits fraudulently claimed from dead children. Every meal was seasoned with someone else's misery." When I stepped down from the stand, my mother was looking at me with that familiar void in her eyes. But this time, I stared back. I'd seen what was behind her mask, and it no longer had power over me. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 47 separate charges. Federal crimes that would keep her in prison for the rest of her life. As the verdict was read, she didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't react at all. She simply nodded, as if confirming a business transaction. Before they led her away, she turned to me one last time. Her lips moved, and although no sound came out, I could read the words clearly, "You're nobody." But she was wrong. I was Caroline Peterson, daughter of Franklin Ellis, sister to Maria, David, and Michael. I was a systems auditor who'd audited the system of lies that built me. I was a survivor who'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over complicity. I was nobody's victim anymore. The email I'd been crafting for 3 days sat in my drafts folder, cursor blinking at the end of the final sentence. It was 2 a.m. The apartment silent except for the hum of my laptop. Outside, Albuquerque slept under a blanket of stars, oblivious to the revolution happening in my kitchen. I'd written and rewritten this message dozens of times. Too angry, too clinical, too much pain bleeding through the words. But now, with the trial behind me and both of them facing decades in prison, I'd found the right tone. Cold, factual, final. I pulled up the recipients one more time. My mother's personal email, the one she'd used for legitimate correspondence, now monitored by federal authorities. I'd been told she would receive it, though she couldn't respond. That was fine. This wasn't a conversation. Talks. Linda Peterson, 1967, gmail.com. Subject: Everything you need to know. Linda. By the time you read this, you'll have been in federal prison for approximately 72 hours. I wanted to ensure you had adequate time to understand your new reality before I provided you with mine. First, the practical matters. Your beloved coin collection was seized yesterday. $347,000 in rare coins, hidden in a storage unit in Las Cruces. The FBI found it using the pattern analysis I provided. You always rented units in tax season. Always paid cash for 5 years up front. Always used variations of your mother's maiden name. The proceeds will go to your victims through the restitution fund. The house you shared with Rick is being foreclosed. Turns out, the second mortgage you took out in 2019 forged documents, naturally had an acceleration clause triggered by criminal conviction. Your neighbors watched as federal agents carried out boxes of evidence. Mrs. Chen asked me if you were really the monster the news described. I told her the truth, you were worse. Your sister in Oklahoma has been contacted about your mother's death in 2018. Imagine her surprise to learn you'd been collecting survivor benefits for 3 years posthumously. She's pressing charges separately. Another victim for your tally. RNL Holdings, LLC has been dissolved. The properties purchased with stolen funds have been seized. That tidy profit you made flipping houses built on my credit. Gone, like every other thing you built on lies. Now, the personal revelations. I met with Dr. Patricia Vance last week. Remember her? The therapist you sent me to when I was 15. When I started asking too many questions about my father, she kept excellent records. Your instructions to her to manage Caroline's expectations and redirect unhealthy fixation on absent parent are now part of the public record. Even therapy was a tool for your control. Franklin. My father. The one you told me was dead has been appointed my advocate in the restitution process. He's as meticulous as you trained me to be. Together, we've documented every birthday you told me we couldn't afford parties while you bought coins with my credit. Every Christmas you claimed poverty while funding Rick's hunting trips with fraudulent loans. Every opportunity you sabotaged to keep me dependent. Speaking of Rick, his testimony was illuminating. Did you know he recorded your arguments' 12 years of marital disputes, all digitized and submitted as evidence? My favorite is from 2016, where you explain that I'm more valuable broken than whole, because damaged people don't ask questions. The jury found that one particularly compelling. Your mother, my grandmother. I never met because you told me she died when I was born, actually passed only 6 years ago. Franklin knew her. She spent her final years wondering why her daughter disappeared, why she never got to meet her granddaughter. Another relationship you stole from me. Another lie to maintain your control. The other victims have formed a support group. We meet weekly, comparing notes on your methods. It's fascinating how consistent you were. The slow isolation, the financial entanglement, the calculated emotional manipulation. You ran the same playbook for 27 years. Dr. Morrison, you remember him. The dentist you worked for in 2003 brought a flowchart he'd made of your patterns. We've shared it with the FBI for their training programs on long-term fraud identification. I want you to know that your notebook, the one with all your victims' information, has been invaluable, not just for prosecution, but for healing. Every person you marked as successfully integrated or asset fully leveraged now knows the truth. They weren't crazy. Their suspicions were real. You were the lie. My birth certificate has been corrected. My legal name is now Caroline Ellis Peterson. I kept Peterson as a middle name, not for you, but because it's the name I built my career with, the name on my degrees, the name I made honest through my own efforts. The birth date remains April 15th. Thank you for not lying about that, but now it lists Franklin Ellis as my father and acknowledges that several details were fraudulently altered by you. Your granddaughter, oh, did Rick not mention that in his plea testimony? I'm 6 weeks pregnant. Franklin is over the moon about becoming a grandfather. The baby will grow up surrounded by truth, by family who chose to find me rather than erase me, by love that doesn't come with credit checks and forged signatures. Everything you tried to steal from me, I'm giving to them. The forensic accountants found 17 more victims in their final review, 17 people whose identities you sampled like a buffet, taking what you needed and leaving them to discover the damage years later. The youngest was 4 when you started using his social security number. He's 19 now, just learning why he couldn't get student loans for college. His mother's victim impact statement was devastating. But don't worry, I've connected them with our support group. We take care of each other now. Finally, I want to address what you said in the visiting room, that without you, I'm nobody. You're right, in a way. Without you, I'm not the isolated, self-doubting woman you crafted. I'm not the obedient daughter who never questioned the inconsistencies. I'm not the victim who would have forgiven you eventually, like you predicted. Without you, I'm nobody you would recognize. I'm strong where you made me weak. I'm connected where you kept me isolated. I'm truth where you were lies. Without you, I'm free. This is the last communication you'll receive from me. Your phone privileges are restricted. But I know you'll try to call. Don't. I've changed my number. Your letters will be returned unopened. Your appeals for forgiveness will find only silence. You once told me that family was about sacrifice. You were right, and I've sacrificed the family that hurt me for the one that healed me. Goodbye, Linda. May your remaining years be as empty as the love you pretended to give. Caroline Ellis Peterson. Peace. The woman in cell block C, who looks familiar, that's Christina Reeves. You stole her brother James's identity for my fictional dead father. She recognized you from the news coverage. I hear she's very interested in discussing your creative interpretation of her family history. Enjoy your new community. I read through it one last time, checking for anything that might give her ammunition, any emotion she could exploit even from prison, but it was clean, clinical, complete. Everything she needed to know about the life that had continued without her, the world that had healed in her absence. My finger hovered over the send button. 3 days of writing, 27 years of pain, 1 click to end it all. I thought about adding something about forgiveness, about hope for her redemption, but that would be another lie, and I was done with those. She'd made her choices every day for decades. Now she could live with the consequences. I clicked send. The email disappeared from my screen, winging its way through servers and security protocols to find her in whatever federal facility would be her home for the next 40 years. By morning, she'd read it. She'd know that every secret had been exposed, every asset seized, every victim found and validated. Most importantly, she'd know that I'd survived her worst and built something better from the wreckage. I closed my laptop and made myself tea, standing at my kitchen window as dawn broke over the mountains. In a few hours, Franklin would call for our daily check-in. Maria was flying in this weekend to help me shop for the baby. My half-brothers had started a group chat where they sent terrible dad jokes in honor of finding their missing sister. I had a family, a real one, built on DNA and truth, and the choice to show up for each other. The family she'd tried to steal from me had found me anyway. Love persistent as water finding its way through stone. My phone buzzed with a notification. The email had been delivered. Read receipt confirmed. Somewhere in a federal prison. Linda Peterson was learning that her daughter had not just survived, but thrived. That every seed of destruction she'd planted had somehow grown into strength. I deleted the email from my sent folder. No need to keep reminders of closed chapters. Today was about moving forward, about the life growing inside me, about the family waiting to embrace us both. The sun painted Albuquerque's mountains gold. A new day rising over the desert. I'd been nobody's daughter. Now I was everybody's Franklin's. Patricia's, my siblings, my child's. The transformation was complete. The message had been sent. The past had been addressed and filed away. Now, finally, I could live. The federal courthouse in Albuquerque buzzed with media attention on the day of Rick's formal sentencing. 6 months had passed since my mother's conviction, and the press had dubbed it the identity theft case of the decade. I sat in the gallery's front row, my hand resting on my growing belly, Franklin beside me with his steady presence. Rick entered in shackles, the orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his diminished frame. Prison had aged him rapidly. The bullying forest ranger who'd terrorized my childhood now looked hollow, defeated. His eyes swept the courtroom and stopped on me. For a moment, something flickered there, regret. Fear, then his lawyer whispered in his ear, and he faced forward. "Mr. Hayward," Judge Patricia Newcomb began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you've pled guilty to 15 counts of identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and assault. Your cooperation with authorities has been noted. However, the court must also consider the systematic nature of your crimes and their impact on victims." The prosecutor stood, adjusting her papers. "Your Honor, while Mr. Hayward's cooperation has been valuable, we cannot ignore that he was an active participant in a criminal enterprise that destroyed lives. His assault on Ms. Peterson when she discovered the truth shows a pattern of using violence to maintain criminal conspiracy." Rick's attorney countered with the familiar refrain Rick was manipulated, was just following his wife's lead, was sorry for his actions. But then came the victim impact statements. I wasn't the only one who spoke. Tom Willis drove from Colorado, his hands shaking as he described losing his home to foreclosure because of loans he'd never taken. Sandra Morrison talked about the therapy she'd needed after discovering her dead daughter's identity had been used for decades. One by one, 11 victims stood and shared their stories. When my turn came, I stood slowly, my pregnancy-making movement deliberate. I'd written my statement weeks ago, but standing there, facing the man who'd made my childhood a careful dance of avoidance and fear, I set the paper aside. "Rick Hayward was my stepfather for 26 years, I began, my voice steady. "In that time, he taught me to be silent, to be small, to be grateful for whatever scraps of tolerance he threw my way. He used fear as a parenting tool and violence as punctuation when I stepped out of line." I looked directly at him, but the physical abuse was almost easier to bear than the theft. "You didn't just steal my identity, you stole my sense of self. Every financial decision I've made has been shadowed by the fear that my credit was ruined before I even had a chance. Every relationship has been complicated by the trust issues you embedded in my foundation." My hand moved to my stomach. "I'm having a daughter. She'll grow up knowing her worth isn't measured in credit scores or forged signatures. She'll know love doesn't come with interest rates. She'll have what you and Linda stole from me, a family built on truth." I sat down, Franklin's hand finding mine. Rick stared at the defense table, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't speak. When Judge Newcomb delivered the sentence 18 years with no possibility of parole for the first 12, Rick finally looked up, not at the judge, not at his lawyer, but at me. His lips moved, and I could read the words, "I'm sorry." Too little, too late, but something. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with Franklin and Patricia, who'd flown in for the hearing. Reporters pushed forward with questions I didn't want to answer. "Ms. Peterson, how does it feel to see justice served? Will you ever forgive your mother and stepfather? What's next for you?" I gave them nothing but a brief statement Martin had prepared. Justice had been served. I was focused on moving forward. I wished healing for all victims. The cameras captured my composed facade, missing the earthquake underneath. That evening, in my apartment with my chosen family around me, I finally let myself feel it. The little girl who'd hidden in closets when Rick came home drunk. The teenager who'd worked 3 jobs thinking we were poor. The young woman who'd visited a stranger's grave with wilted flowers. All those versions of me could finally rest. "It's over," Maria said, rubbing my back as tears I'd held for months finally fell. "They can't hurt you anymore." But it wasn't quite over. There was still the matter of the civil suits, the restitution hearings, the long process of untangling 27 years of financial fraud. And there were the other victims, the ones still discovering damage, still processing betrayal. 3 days after Rick's sentencing, I got an unexpected call from Detective Walsh. "Caroline, I wanted to give you a heads up. Your mother has requested to see you, one last time. She says—" "No," I figured, but there's something else. "She's written a confession, full admission to every crime, including several we didn't know about. Her lawyer says she'll only deliver it to you personally. I thought about the email I'd sent, the finality of that goodbye. She's trying to manipulate me, even from prison. Probably, but this confession could help victims we haven't found yet. I'm not saying you should go, I'm just saying it's your choice. That night, I couldn't sleep. The baby kicked and rolled, as restless as my thoughts. Another confession, another game, another attempt to pull me back into her web. But if there were victims we hadn't found, people still suffering under the weight of her crimes. I made my decision at dawn. The federal prison was 2 hours from Albuquerque, a complex of concrete and razor wire baking in the desert sun. I went alone. Despite Franklin's protests, this needed to be just me and the truth. She sat in the visiting room in her prison uniform, number 47823 stitched above the pocket, without makeup, without the armor of her chosen identity. She looked like what she was, a 57-year-old woman who'd spent her life running from herself. "I knew you'd come," she said as I sat down. "I'm here for the confession, nothing else." She smiled, that cold calculation still intact despite the bars. "Always so transactional. I taught you well." "You taught me to survive you. There's a difference." She pulled out a thick envelope, sealed and initialed by prison officials. 23 additional victims, names, dates, amounts, everything the FBI needs. "Why now?" "Because I'm dying," she said it simply, like discussing the weather. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 3 months, maybe 6. I processed this information without emotion. She'd lied about death before. "I don't believe you." "I don't care if you believe me. Check the medical records if you want. Terminal diagnosis confirmed last week." She pushed the envelope across the table. "This is my legacy now. Complete documentation of every crime, every victim, every dollar stolen." "Why tell me? Why not just give it to your lawyer?" For the first time in my life, I saw something real flicker across her face. "Because you're the only one who succeeded. 27 years, dozens of victims, and you're the only one who brought me down. I suppose I owe you the truth." "You owe me nothing I want." "Not even answers." "Don't you want to know why?" I'd asked myself that question 1,000 times. Why a mother would sacrifice her daughter's future for money. Why she'd chosen Rick over truth. Why she'd built a life on the ruins of others. "I know why," I said finally. "Because you're empty. Because you needed to be someone, anyone, other than yourself. Because stealing identities was easier than building one." She laughed, a sound like paper tearing. Close, but not quite. She leaned forward, and I saw death sitting in the shadows under her eyes. "I did it because I could. Because people like you, like Franklin, like all the others you trust, you believe, you think family means something, that love isn't transactional, that humans are basically good, and that belief is a weakness I could exploit." "It's not weakness, it's humanity." "Same thing," she gestured at the envelope. "Take it, add 23 more notches to your victory, have your baby, play house with Franklin's family, pretend you've won." "I have won." "Have you? You'll spend your life looking over your shoulder, checking your credit, doubting every relationship. I'm in your code now. Caroline, every time you hesitate to trust, that's me. Every time you check a lock twice, verify a document, question someone's motives, that's my legacy." I stood up, taking the envelope. "No, that's survival. Your legacy is this dying alone in federal prison while your victims rebuild their lives. Your legacy is being a cautionary tale, a reminder that choosing cruelty has consequences." "Caroline." "My name," I said, walking toward the door, "is Caroline Ellis Peterson. You don't get to use it anymore." The guards buzzed me through security checkpoints, back to the desert sun and freedom. In my car, I opened the envelope carefully. 23 names, annotated in her precise handwriting. Each entry included dates, methods, amounts stolen, the final documentation of a criminal life. At the bottom, a single line, "You were never supposed to be strong enough to stop me." But I had been. We all had been. Eventually. The victims who'd testified, who'd formed support groups, who'd refused to let shame keep us silent. We'd been stronger than her emptiness. I drove home through the familiar streets of Albuquerque, the envelope on the passenger seat like a ghost. Tomorrow, I'd deliver it to Detective Walsh. 23 more people would get answers. Justice. Validation that their suspicions had been real. But tonight, I had a nursery to paint. Maria and David were coming over to help, bringing takeout and arguments about color schemes. Franklin had bought too many stuffed animals. Patricia had knitted blankets in soft yellows and greens. My phone rang as I pulled into my parking spot. Maria's voice bubbled with excitement. "We're here." David brought his entire playlist of baby-appropriate classic rock. This should be interesting. I laughed, surprising myself with how real it sounded. "I'll be right up." In the elevator, I thought about what my mother had said, that I'd always carry her mark, always be checking locks and documents, always be guarding against betrayal. She was right, partially, but she'd missed the most important part. I'd learned to verify, yes, but I'd also learned to trust, to build family from DNA and choice and stubborn love, to create life where she'd only stolen it. The elevator opened to the sound of laughter from my apartment, my family real, chosen, true, waiting to help me build a nursery for a baby who would never know the weight of lies. I left the envelope in my car. Tonight was for painting walls and arguing about music and feeling the baby kick when her grandfather sang off-key lullabies. Tonight was for life. The dead could wait until morning. The courtroom was packed for the final restitution hearing. 2 years had passed since that night I'd confronted my mother with DNA results. 2 years of trials, testimonies, and truth-telling. Now, we gathered one last time to witness the formal distribution of assets to victims. I sat in the gallery with Emma balanced on my lap, her chubby fingers playing with my necklace. At 13 months, she had Franklin's eyes and my stubbornness, a combination that promised interesting years ahead. Franklin sat beside us, making soft faces at his granddaughter when he thought the judge wasn't looking. "This court has reviewed all claims," Judge Newcomb announced, "and determined final restitution amounts for 43 confirmed victims of the Peterson-Hayward criminal enterprise." 43. The number had grown from the initial 11 to 23 with my mother's confession, then expanded again as the FBI's investigation uncovered tentacles of fraud reaching back 3 decades. Each name represented a story, a life derailed, trust betrayed. The judge read through the distributions, properties liquidated, hidden assets recovered, even my mother's precious coin collection converted to cash for victims. The total amount recovered $3.7 million, more than anyone had imagined possible from a couple living in a modest Albuquerque home. "Ms. Caroline Ellis Peterson," the judge called. I stood, shifting Emma to my hip. "As the victim who exposed this criminal enterprise and suffered both financial and personal damages, the court awards you $847,000 in restitution." I felt the weight of that number, not just the money, but what it represented. Every forged loan, every stolen opportunity, every therapy session learning to trust again. But as Emma babbled and reached for the judge's gavel, I felt something else too: freedom. After the hearing, victims gathered in the courthouse lobby. We'd become a strange family over these 2 years, bonded by shared victimization and mutual support. Tom Willis hugged me, tears in his eyes. "I can finally buy a house again," he whispered. "Start over. Thank you." Sandra Morrison pressed a card into my hand. "My daughter would have been 30 this year, because of you. Her memory isn't tied to fraud anymore. It's tied to justice." One by one, they thanked me, shared their plans, celebrated their freedom. The money mattered, but the validation mattered more. They weren't crazy. They hadn't imagined it. They'd been victims of calculated predators who happened to be my family. That evening, I stood in my new home's kitchen purchased with untainted money from my legitimate work preparing dinner for my real family. The house wasn't large, but it was honest. Every mortgage payment came from my own earnings. Every document bore my actual signature. "She's getting big," Maria observed, watching Emma cruise along the coffee table. testing her newly discovered walking skills. "She'll be running soon," Patricia added, her knitting needles clicking as she worked on yet another blanket, just like her mother. "I never ran," I protested, chopping vegetables for dinner. "No," Franklin said quietly. "You stood and fought. That's harder." We ate together, 5 adults and one determined toddler who insisted on feeding herself despite the mess. Conversation flowed easily. David's construction business was booming. Michael had gotten engaged. Maria was considering a promotion that would move her to Albuquerque. Normal family discussions about normal family life. After dinner, I found myself standing in Emma's nursery, watching her sleep in the crib Franklin had built by hand. The room was everything my childhood hadn't been honest. Safe, filled with love that didn't come with conditions or credit checks. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Linda Peterson, central figure in identity theft ring, dies in federal custody. I stared at the headline, waiting for emotions that didn't come. She'd been right about the cancer. At least 3 months, just as predicted. The article was brief, noting her death, summarizing her crimes, mentioning the ongoing restitution process, a footnote to a cautionary tale. I forwarded the article to our victim support group with a simple message: "It's over." The responses came quickly: relief, closure, some admitting to complicated grief. We'd all lost something to Linda Peterson money. Trust, innocence. Her death didn't return those things, but it did close a chapter. Franklin found me there an hour later, still standing in the nursery. "You okay?" he asked. "Did you ever love her really?" He considered the question seriously. One of the things I'd grown to appreciate about my father. I loved who I thought she was, but that person never existed. Did she? No, I don't think she did. Then I mourned her a long time ago, when she took you and ran. The woman I loved died. What lived after that was someone else. Emma stirred in her sleep, tiny fingers grasping at dreams. I thought about the notebook Agent Martinez had shown me, my mother's neat handwriting documenting her victims. Entry number 1, Franklin E., emotional attachment exploitable, financial resources moderate, extraction successful. Even her love had been a con. "I'm not going to the funeral," I said. "I wouldn't expect you to. That's not your mother in that coffin. Your mother was the story she told, the fiction, and you can't bury fiction." 2 days later, while my mother was being interred in a prison cemetery with only a number to mark her grave, I took Emma to the park, the same park where that photo was taken on my 8th birthday, the one piece of evidence that we'd ever looked like a normal family. Emma toddled through the grass, chasing pigeons with delighted shrieks. Other families played nearby, real families, complicated families, chosen families, all of them imperfect, none of them built on systematic fraud. My phone rang. Detective Walsh, calling with a final update. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "Rick died this morning. Heart attack in his cell. The stress of prison, apparently." Another headline that wouldn't make the news. Another ending to a story that began with lies and ended with emptiness. I thanked her, hung up, and deleted the contact. No need for detective numbers anymore. "Mama," Emma called, holding up a dandelion with the pure joy only toddlers can muster over weeds. "Beautiful, baby," I told her, accepting her gift. Just beautiful. We stayed until sunset, Emma exhausting herself with the serious business of examining every stick and rock in the park. As I carried her back to the car, she nestled against my shoulder, complete trust in every relaxed muscle. This was what my mother never understood. Trust wasn't weakness. It was the foundation everything real was built on. Without it, you could steal identities but never have one. You could forge signatures but never sign your name to anything that mattered. You could take everything and still have nothing. The next morning brought normalcy, work, where I'd been promoted to senior auditor. My expertise in financial fraud making me valuable in ways I'd never planned. Emma's daycare, run by a woman who'd become a friend. Coffee with Maria, who was apartment hunting. Dinner plans with Franklin and Patricia. Life real, honest, unforged life. A week after my mother's death, a package arrived. No return address, but I recognized the prison's postmark. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a single item, her wedding ring from Rick. The one that had split my skin that night. Everything changed. A note in her handwriting simply said, "Evidence." I held the ring up to the light, this small circle of metal that had drawn blood and exposed truth. Then I walked to my jewelry box and pulled out a different ring, the one Franklin had given Patricia when they married, which she'd insisted I have when Emma was born. For when she's older, Patricia had said, every girl should have something from her grandmother. 2 rings, 2 legacies, 2 choices about what to pass down. I put my mother's ring in the garage sale box. Someone else could have it, could make it mean something different. Emma would get Patricia's ring, would inherit love instead of lies, choice instead of manipulation, family that gathered around dinner tables instead of in courtrooms. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd started for Emma, documenting our story for when she was old enough to understand. Your grandmother Linda died today, I wrote. She was not a good person. She hurt many people, including me. But from her, I learned the most important lesson of my life, how to recognize real love by experiencing its absence. You will never have to learn that way. You are surrounded by people who chose you, who fought to find you before you were even born, who love you without conditions or credit checks. That's your inheritance. That's your true identity. I closed the journal and checked on Emma one more time. She slept peacefully, unaware that both her step-grandparents were gone, that her origin story included federal crimes and family betrayal. Someday, I'd tell her everything, but not yet. For now, she got to be what I'd never been, an innocent child in a safe home. The doorbell rang. Franklin and Patricia, arriving for their Wednesday night babysitting duties so I could attend my support group meeting. We'd transitioned from victims to survivors to whatever comes after, people rebuilding, people choosing trust despite having every reason not to. How are you doing? Patricia asked, studying my face with motherly concern. I'm good, I said, surprised to find it was true. Ready to move forward. As I drove to the community center where we met, I thought about all the ways this could have ended. I could have stayed silent, could have let the bruise heal and the lies continue, could have accepted my mother's version of love, Rick's version of family, could have passed that poison to Emma. Instead, I'd chosen truth, messy, painful, expensive truth, and in choosing it, I'd found everything my mother tried to steal: a father who'd searched for decades, siblings who welcomed me instantly, a stepmother who knitted blankets for a grandchild she'd never met, a family built on DNA and stubborn love. The meeting was full that night, new faces mixed with familiar ones, all of us carrying stories of betrayal and survival. When my turn came to share, I stood with confidence I'd earned through fire. My name is Caroline Ellis Peterson, I began, the name feeling like armor and wings combined. 2 years ago, I discovered my entire identity was built on fraud. Today, I'm here to tell you, you can rebuild, you can trust again, you can turn their worst into your best. Heads nodded around the circle. We were proof of resurrection, every one of us. Proof that identity couldn't be permanently stolen, that trust could be rehabilitated, that families could be chosen and created and claimed. After the meeting, I sat in my car for a moment before heading home. The stars were brilliant in the desert sky. Same constellations my mother had lived and died under, but they looked different now, not cold and distant, but old friends keeping watch. My phone lit up with a text from Maria. Emma said her first sentence, "We have video, hurry home." Home, the word that had meant fear for so long now meant joy. I started the engine and drove toward my real life, my true family, my honest future. Behind me, the past stayed buried with the 2 people who'd tried to bury me first. They'd failed, I'd won, and tomorrow, Emma would learn a new word, and Franklin would tell his terrible dad jokes, and Patricia would knit something else we didn't need but would treasure anyway. Tomorrow would be another day of chosen family and earned trust and love without interest rates. The bruise had long since healed, but the strength it revealed that was permanent, that was mine. That was the only inheritance that mattered. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw them through the window, my family, laughing at something Emma had done, waiting for me to complete the picture. I parked and sat for just a moment, memorizing this scene of ordinary happiness that had cost so much to achieve. Then I went inside to claim it. Thank you for listening to Caroline's story of survival, justice, and ultimately, redemption. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on this incredible journey. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And if you want more people to hear this powerful tale of truth triumphing over deception, hit that hype button to help spread Caroline's message. Your support means the world and helps these important stories reach those who need to hear them most.